In this video you'll learn how you can improve your lighting in Blender to get better renders. Apart from showing you the basics of the lighting, I'll do a breakdown of the various lighting setups that you're seeing right now on the screen. In this way, if you follow the entire video, you will be able to replicate them. If you want the 3D files of the renders that you're seeing right now, you can find them on xrpage.com. I'll give you the link down below in the description. Every time that I use Blender, I change the render engine from Eevee to Cycles and I use GPU compute. So let's start with this render. The lighting of this scene is actually really simple. I've used a sky texture that you can find in the world properties. I set the air and the ozone to 0 and the dust to 1. That's because the dust controls the intensity of the shadows. So if I put the dust to 10, I will lose the details of the different shadows. The strength is set to 2, and that's because in order to create the actual shadows, I used 2 simple trees that are generated with this add-on that you can find in Edit Preferences, Add-ons, and search for Sampling Tree Gen. After that you enable this, you can press Shift A, go on Curve and Sampling Tree Gen. And I've positioned these 2 trees in front of the light in order to get these shadows on the wall. In order to get this kind of filter of the image, I went into Render Properties and I've selected AGX and Punchy. This is in Blender 4, and if you're using a previous version, you don't have AGX. The default filter is Filmic, and usually when I use Filmic, like in this case, I use or medium high contrast or high contrast. In this case, I'll go with medium high contrast and I'll just change the exposure here. Or I can use the same exposure, but when I go to the world properties, I change the strength, for example, in this case at 0.6. And if you want to make the shadows a little bit more blue and not as defined, you can just add some air to the sky texture. I've used the same lighting setup also for this scene. As you can see, there is a tree in front of the sky texture that creates these shadows. The sky texture has 0 for the air, for the ozone, and a low value for the dust. This time the strength is set at 0.5, and that's also because I've used the Filmic, that is the default filter. The last example of this type of lighting is this one. This is actually a little bit different because, as you can see, the dust is set to a high value and not to something like 1 or 0.5. That's because in this specific case the shadows cover almost all the image, and so if I use a low value the look will be completely ruined. So I'd rather going to something like 7.5. The last thing that you can add in order to improve the lighting is the node that I've used in the render of the drone. You can go into the compositing tab, add a glare node that is set to fog glow. After that you can play with the threshold and with the size, and you can also use a hue correct and a color balance. And also another thing that I usually do is clicking on the gain and downgrading a little bit the value. Usually in renders I use something like 0.98. So if you want to make the same lighting setup that I showed you before, but kind of in a procedural way, you can do that just by adding a plane. After that, press another time Shift A, add a light and area. Just move it a little bit and you have to change the spread to 0 or something like 1. After, you go to the shader editor, you click on use nodes, actually change the background color to black. In this way you'll see in a better way, and I delete the point light. So now this is the effect of your area light. If you want to create the kind of lighting setup of before, just add a noise texture or a mask grave texture, a color ramp, and now when you connected the nodes, you can play a little bit. You can obviously change the scale and the details. If you press Ctrl T or you add a texture coordinate with a mapping node, you can also play with the scale and other values. If you want to animate this thing, just switch on 4D and now you have this value. Now with the area light you can actually project an image, so press Shift A like before and search for image texture. Click on open, and after that you select the image, connect the color to the color of the emission, and as you can see you'll have your image projected. Now let's say that the image that you want to project is not the same aspect ratio of the area light. You can fix that just by pressing N and by inserting, for example, on the x-axis 1.6 and on the y-axis 0.9. This node setup is actually really good in this case, because the only way that you can extrapolate a good render from Blender with this kind of scenes is where you don't have the same intensity of the light across all the image, because as you can see the look would be this one. And so this difference in contrast make the image a lot better than with the basic lighting. If you want to hide multiple objects from one light, you can do that only if you have Blender 4. So select the light, go on Object Properties, and here in the shading, select Light Linking, press on plus, and drag and drop the object inside of the collection. For example, I've used this lightning trick in this situation, so you can see on the left the tree with the spotlight and on the right the tree without the spotlight. So in the case that you're wondering how I've customized the sky texture, you can do that by going into the shader editor, switch from object, that is the default one, to word, and now if you click on use nodes, you can customize the sky texture. In this case I've used a gradient texture with this setup with the rotation on the y-axis set to 90 to create the factor between the dark blue and the light blue. So if I just wanted to have dark blue on top and light blue on the bottom without the stars, I can just use the same sky texture. The only difference is the altitude. Here is set to 0 and here is set to 20,000. You can create the stars just with a Verne texture and a color ramp. Set to smooth F1 and I've used these parameters. The color ramp with the Verne texture are the factor and the B value of the mix color. And here there is a sky texture that has altitude to 20,000 is the A value. After that, combine the sky texture with 0 for altitude and the other node setup in the mix color. Here I've also downgraded a little bit the strength. If you want to add a sky that's more realistic, switch from color to environment texture. After that, press open. The environment texture basically is an HDRI. You can find them on websites like IMDCG. So that's how the HDRI should look after that you open it in Blender. If you want to have a better control of the HDRI, you can do that just like before for the sky texture by going into the shader editor and switch to word. You can change a little bit the look of the HDRI by adding a gamma node. As you can see, the gamma is set to 1.2, and that's because as you can see, if I set to 1 it will look like that. And obviously also the HDRI changed a little bit. That is with gamma set to 1, and with gamma set to 1.2 there is more contrast in the image. Keep in mind that just like for the other images, you can rotate the HDRI by using a mapping node and a texture coordinate. For example, I've done it in this case because I want to have a better control of the shadows. If you want to create this light dispersion effect that I've also used in this render, if you're interested in the creation of this kind of procedural smoke, you can watch the other tutorial. So you can do the effect just by adding 3 different lights For example, in this case, I'll use area light. So scale it down a little bit. Now the spread needs to be at a low value, let's say for example 2. Now on the color, switch to RGB and give the first one red to 1 and the other two values to 0. After that press Shift D and rotate only a bit the area light and change the color to green. Repeat the same operation the last time, and this time select blue to 1. So now you have this kind of light dispersion effect on the edges. You can control this effect with the spread and also by changing the scale of the light. If you want to add light rays to your scene in Blender, like I've done in this render, if you're interested in the vehicle, I've uploaded the 2 videos on the channel. You can do that just by adding a big cube that covers all the scene, as you can see. So in this case, I've used a principal volume that is connected to the volume and not to the surface. To the surface there is nothing connected. After that I've used a gradient texture that has the rotation set to 90 on the y-axis and a color ramp to the density. I've used the low values like 0.03, 0.005 and 0. As you can see, the top has more density, that means that is controlled by this value, and the bottom doesn't have density. In fact, the bottom is controlled by the 0 value. With this combination, the light rays will not reach the floor. If you want to add details to the light rays, you have to create shadows. In this case, I've used, like I showed you before, the trees. In fact, as you can see, the shadow is above the windows that is set on the ceiling. That's all for this video. I hope that you found this video helpful. Subscribe for more and see you all in the next one.